The pistol shot echoed through the dusty street of Bismarck, North Dakota, and Samuel Edwards dropped the hay bale he had been carrying to turn toward the sound, his heart hammering in his chest as he watched a young woman in a blue dress stumble backward from a spooked horse that had nearly trampled her outside the general store. Samuel sprinted across the rutted dirt road, his boots kicking up clouds of dust in the late summer heat of 1878. The woman had caught herself against a hitching post, one hand pressed to her chest as she gasped for breath. The horse, still wild-eyed from whatever had startled it, was being wrestled under control by its owner, a grizzled prospector who was cursing up a storm. "Miss, are you hurt?" Samuel asked, reaching her side just as she straightened her posture. She turned to face him, and Samuel felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were a striking green, framed by dark lashes, and despite the fright she had just experienced, there was a composed intelligence in her expression that immediately set her apart from anyone he had ever met. Her dark hair was pinned up beneath a modest hat, and the quality of her dress marked her as someone of means. "I am fine, thank you," she said, her voice carrying the refinement of Eastern education. "The gunshot startled the animal. I should have been more careful." "Gunshot came from the saloon," Samuel said, glancing down the street. "Probably just some fool celebrating his luck at cards. You sure you are all right?" "Quite sure." She brushed dust from her skirt with gloved hands. "Though I appreciate your concern, Mr. Edwards. Samuel Edwards. I work at the Copper River Ranch just outside town. A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Edwards. I am Natalie Emerson." The name landed like a stone in still water. Emerson. Judge Theodore Emerson had arrived in Bismarck 6 months ago, appointed by the territorial government to bring order to the rough settlements along the Missouri River. The man was known for his strict interpretation of the law and his even stricter views on social propriety. Samuel had seen him once, passing through town in a fine carriage, looking as out of place in the Dakota territory as a peacock in a chicken coop. "The judge's daughter," Samuel said, and immediately wished he had kept the observation to himself. It sounded like an accusation. "I see my father's reputation precedes me," Natalie said, and there was something guarded in her expression now. "Yes, I arrived last week from Boston. I am still adjusting to the frontier." "Well, Miss Emerson, you best be careful. Bismarck is not Boston. Horses spook easy, and there are rougher elements than spooked horses in these parts. So I am learning." She studied him for a moment, and Samuel became acutely aware of the dust on his clothes, the sweat staining his shirt, the calluses on his hands. He was 23 years old and had been working ranches since he was 15. He could rope a steer, break a horse, and work from sunup to sundown without complaint, but standing before this educated woman from the East, he felt every inch the rough cowhand. "I should be getting back to the ranch," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "You take care, Miss Emerson." "Thank you again, Mr. Edwards." Samuel returned to the wagon where his forgotten hay bale lay in the street. He hoisted it onto the bed with the others and climbed up to the driver's seat, but before he snapped the reins, he glanced back. Natalie Emerson was entering the general store, and just before she disappeared inside, she looked back at him. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, and then she was gone. The ride back to Copper River Ranch gave Samuel too much time to think. He had no business letting his thoughts linger on Judge Emerson's daughter. The social divide between them was wider than the Missouri River and twice as deep. He was a ranch hand who earned $30 a month and slept in a bunkhouse with 5 other men. She was the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the territory, educated in fancy schools, accustomed to a life of comfort and refinement. Still, he could not shake the memory of those green eyes or the way she had looked at him. not with the dismissive glance of someone looking at a servant, but with genuine interest, and perhaps something more. The Copper River Ranch sprawled across 1,500 acres of grassland and rolling hills. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure built of logs and stone, home to Josiah Miller and his wife Margaret. Samuel had worked for Josiah for 3 years now, and it was good, honest work. The ranch ran 200 head of cattle and supplied beef to the growing towns along the Missouri River. "You took your sweet time," said Daniel Fletcher, another ranch hand, as Samuel drove the wagon into the yard. "Boss was asking about those supplies." "Had some trouble in town," Samuel said, jumping down from the seat. "Horse nearly trampled someone outside the general store. Anyone hurt?" "No, just shaken up." Together they unloaded the supplies: hay, grain for the horses, nails, a new saw blade, salt pork, flour, and the dozen other things necessary to keep a ranch running. The work was familiar and required little thought, which left Samuel's mind free to wander back to the encounter in town. That evening, as the ranch hands gathered around the long table in the bunkhouse for supper, the conversation turned to the judge. Judge Emerson sentenced Wild Jack Murphy to 10 years hard labor for cattle rustling, said Pete Morrison, the oldest of the hands at 45. "That is twice what Judge Henderson would have given him." "Emerson does not play games," Daniel said. "My brother says he is trying to clean up the whole territory, make it respectable for when statehood comes." "If statehood comes," Pete countered. "Could be another 20 years before that happens." "Judge brought his daughter out from Boston," Samuel said, trying to keep his tone casual. "Met her today." Every head at the table turned toward him. "You met Natalie Emerson?" Daniel asked. "What is she like?" "Educated, well-spoken, pretty." Pete laughed. "Pretty enough to make you forget she is about 1,000 miles above your station." "I am not forgetting anything," Samuel said sharply. "I just met the woman, helped her when a horse spooked. That is all." "That is all it takes sometimes," Pete said, but his tone was gentler now. "You be careful there, Sam. Men like Judge Emerson do not take kindly to ranch hands sniffing around their daughters. You could find yourself on the wrong end of a lot of trouble." Samuel knew Pete was right, but that knowledge did nothing to stop him from thinking about Natalie Emerson as he lay in his bunk that night, listening to the snores of the other men and the distant howl of a coyote. 3 days passed before Samuel had reason to go back into Bismarck. Josiah needed some documents notarized at the land office, and Samuel volunteered to make the trip. He told himself it had nothing to do with hoping to see a certain judge's daughter, but he knew he was lying. The land office was near the courthouse, a substantial brick building that represented Bismarck's aspirations toward civilization. Samuel conducted his business quickly, then found himself walking past the courthouse, telling himself he was just taking the long way back to where he had tied his horse. Natalie emerged from the courthouse just as Samuel was passing. She wore a different dress today, a pale yellow that brought out the warmth in her complexion. She carried a basket over one arm and was accompanied by an older woman who had the stern look of a housekeeper or governess. "Mr. Edwards," Natalie said, surprise evident in her voice. "What a pleasant coincidence. Miss Emerson." Samuel removed his hat. "I was just conducting some business for my employer." "I am glad to see you. I wanted to thank you properly for your assistance the other day. In all the confusion, I fear I was not as gracious as I should have been." "No thanks necessary, miss. Anyone would have done the same." "Perhaps, but you were the one who did." She glanced at her companion. "Mrs. Crawford, this is Mr. Edwards, the gentleman who helped me when that horse nearly ran me down." Mrs. Crawford gave Samuel a thorough looking over and seemed to find him wanting. "Most fortunate," she said curtly. "Miss Natalie, we should be going. Your father expects us home." "Of course." Natalie hesitated, then said to Samuel, "My father is holding a reception tomorrow evening for some of the town's businessmen and ranchers. Perhaps your employer will be attending." "I would not know, miss." "Well, if he does, and if you happen to accompany him, I hope we might speak again." "I would like that," Samuel said before he could stop himself. Mrs. Crawford made a disapproving sound in her throat, and Natalie gave Samuel a small smile before allowing herself to be led away. Samuel watched them go, his heart beating faster than it had any right to. He rode back to the ranch in a daze, barely noticing the landscape passing around him. When he arrived, he found Josiah in the barn, examining a horse that had thrown a shoe. "Got those documents filed," Samuel said, handing over the receipts. "Good man." Josiah straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Say, I got an invitation to some reception at Judge Emerson's house tomorrow night. Political thing, mostly. Margaret says I should go, show the flag for the ranching community. You want to come along?" Samuel tried to keep the eagerness out of his voice. "If you think it would be appropriate." "Sure, why not? You can drive the carriage and there will be food. Emerson is trying to make a good impression, I hear. Wants to be seen as part of the community, not just some Eastern carpetbagger." The next evening, Samuel washed more thoroughly than usual and put on his best clothes, which still marked him clearly as working class. A clean shirt, a vest that was only slightly worn, trousers without patches, and his good boots. He had even trimmed his hair and shaved, using the cracked mirror in the bunkhouse while Daniel and Pete made increasingly ribald comments. "You are getting awful cleaned up just to drive a carriage," Daniel observed. "Just trying to be presentable," Samuel said. "Presentable for who, I wonder?" Pete said with a knowing grin. Samuel ignored them and went to hitch up the carriage for Josiah and Margaret. The evening was pleasant, with a breeze coming off the river that made the heat bearable. As they drove into town, Margaret Miller chatted about the other people who would likely be attending. "Judge Emerson is trying to establish himself," she said. "His wife passed away years ago, so his daughter is serving as his hostess. Poor girl, so young and already having to manage a household and navigate society." "How old is she?" Samuel asked, trying to sound casual. 20, I believe. The judge kept her in Boston for schooling until recently. I imagine she finds Bismarck quite rustic after city life." 20. Just 3 years younger than himself. Somehow that made things feel slightly less impossible, though Samuel knew better than to let hope take root. The judge's house was one of the finest in Bismarck, a 2-story frame structure with a wide porch and real glass windows. Lanterns had been hung around the yard, and carriages were already lined up along the street. Samuel helped Josiah and Margaret down, then moved to join the other drivers and servants who were gathering around back, but Josiah stopped him. "Come on in, Sam. You are here as part of the ranch delegation, not hired help. Mr. Miller, I do not think, nonsense. You are the best hand I have got and smart as a whip. You belong in there as much as any of those stuffed shirts." So Samuel found himself following the Millers up the front steps and into the house. The interior was finely appointed with furniture that must have been shipped from the East at considerable expense. Oriental rugs covered the floors, and oil paintings hung on the walls. There were perhaps 30 people gathered in the main parlor and dining room, the men in suits and the women in evening dresses that would not have been out of place in a big city. Samuel felt profoundly out of place, but Josiah kept him close, introducing him to various ranchers and businessmen. Most treated Samuel with polite indifference, though a few gave him looks that made it clear they thought he did not belong. Then Natalie appeared, and Samuel forgot about everything else. She wore a dress of deep blue silk that highlighted her eyes, and her dark hair was arranged in an elegant style that left her neck and shoulders bare. She moved through the room with practiced grace, greeting guests and ensuring everyone had refreshments. When her gaze fell on Samuel, her whole face brightened. "Mr. Edwards," she said, approaching him and the Millers, "I am so glad you could attend." "Miss Emerson," Josiah said before Samuel could respond, "your father is to be commended for his hospitality. Beautiful home." "Thank you, Mr. Miller. Father will be pleased to hear it." She turned to Samuel. "I hope you are finding the evening enjoyable." "It is very fine, miss," Samuel managed. "I wonder if I might steal you away for a moment. I have been hoping to show someone the view from the back terrace, and you seem like someone who would appreciate the Dakota landscape." Josiah and Margaret exchanged a glance, but before they could say anything, Natalie had already begun leading Samuel away. He followed her through the crowd, acutely aware of the eyes tracking their movement, and out onto a terrace that overlooked the Missouri River Valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The river gleamed like molten copper in the distance, and the rolling grasslands stretched away to the horizon. It was beautiful in a stark, wild way that was nothing like the cultivated landscapes of the East. "I have only been here a week, but this view never fails to move me," Natalie said softly. "It is so vast, so untamed. Boston feels like a cage by comparison." "I have never been anywhere but the territories," Samuel admitted, "but I cannot imagine wanting to be anywhere else." "Tell me about it," Natalie said, turning to face him. "Tell me what you love about this place." So Samuel did. He told her about the way the prairie looked in spring when wildflowers carpeted the grasslands. He told her about watching thunderstorms roll in from miles away, about the satisfaction of honest work, about the silence of a winter night when the stars felt close enough to touch. He told her about things he had never put into words before, and she listened with an intensity that made him feel like every word mattered. "You make it sound like poetry," she said when he finally ran out of words. "Just the truth, miss. Please call me Natalie. I feel like we have moved beyond such formality." "Then you should call me Samuel, Samuel." She tested the name, and he liked the way it sounded in her voice. "Can I confess something to you?" "Of course." "I have been thinking about you since the day we met. Is that terribly forward of me?" His heart hammered against his ribs. "I have been thinking about you too." "I know this is complicated," Natalie said, stepping closer. "I know there are expectations, social conventions, 100 reasons why we should not even be having this conversation. But Samuel, I did not come to Dakota to live the same constrained life I had in Boston. I came here for something real, something honest. My father wants me to marry some wealthy merchant or up-and-coming lawyer, someone who will advance his political connections." There was frustration in her voice now. "He has already introduced me to 3 suitable gentlemen since I arrived, but they all bore me to tears. They talk about money and politics and their own importance, and not one of them has looked at this landscape with the love I heard in your voice tonight. Natalie, I am a ranch hand. I have nothing to offer you. You have more to offer than you know." She reached out and took his hand, and the touch sent electricity through him. "I am not naive, Samuel. I understand the difficulties, but I also believe that some things are worth the difficulty." Before Samuel could respond, a voice came from the doorway. "Natalie, your father is asking for you." They sprang apart. Mrs. Crawford stood in the doorway, her expression disapproving. "Of course," Natalie said smoothly. "Thank you, Mrs. Crawford. Samuel and I were just admiring the sunset." "I am sure you were," Mrs. Crawford said dryly. "Come along, dear." Natalie gave Samuel one last look, her eyes full of unspoken promise, and then she was gone. Samuel remained on the terrace, his hand still warm from her touch, his mind reeling. He knew this was dangerous. He knew it could only lead to heartache. But he also knew that something had begun tonight that would not be easily stopped. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Samuel rejoined the Millers and tried to focus on the conversations around him, but his attention kept drifting to Natalie. She was across the room, playing the perfect hostess, but several times he caught her glancing his way. Each time their eyes met, something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection forming. On the ride back to the ranch, Margaret Miller was quiet, but Josiah was expansive, talking about the people he had met and the business opportunities discussed. Samuel made appropriate responses, but his thoughts were elsewhere. "Sam," Margaret said suddenly, "you be careful." "Madam." "I saw how Miss Emerson looked at you tonight, and how you looked at her." "Margaret," Josiah began, but she cut him off. "No, Josiah, this needs to be said. Samuel, you are a good man, one of the best I have known. But Judge Emerson is not going to let his daughter take up with a cowhand, no matter how good that cowhand might be. If you pursue this, you are asking for trouble." "I know that, Mrs. Miller." "Do you? Because I am not sure you understand just how much trouble. The judge is a powerful man, and he has the law on his side. He could make your life very difficult." "I am not pursuing anything," Samuel said, but the lie tasted bitter. Margaret sighed. "Just be careful, that is all I am asking." The next few days were torment. Samuel threw himself into ranch work, trying to exhaust himself enough that he would not think about Natalie, but it did not work. She filled his thoughts during the day and haunted his dreams at night. He told himself to forget about her, that nothing could come of it, but his heart refused to listen. Then, 5 days after the reception, Daniel rode in from town with supplies and a sealed envelope. "This was at the general store," he said, handing it to Samuel. "Mrs. Patterson said a lady asked her to make sure you got it." Samuel took the envelope with trembling hands. His name was written on the front in elegant script. He waited until he was alone to open it. The note inside was brief. "Meet me at the old mission ruins tomorrow afternoon at 2. Please come. N." The mission ruins were about 3 miles outside of town, the remains of a Catholic mission that had been abandoned years ago. It was remote enough to offer privacy, but close enough to Bismarck that Natalie could reach it without raising too much suspicion. Samuel knew he should ignore the note. Meeting her would only make things harder. But even as he had the thought, he knew he would go. The next day, Samuel told Josiah he needed to ride into town for personal business. Josiah gave him a long look but did not ask questions. Samuel saddled his horse and rode out, his heart racing with anticipation and dread. The mission ruins sat on a low hill overlooking a bend in the river. Stone walls still stood in places, and the wooden roof had long since collapsed. It was a melancholy place, a reminder of dreams abandoned, but the view was spectacular. Natalie was already there when Samuel arrived, sitting on a fallen stone with a horse tied nearby. She had changed from her usual fine dresses into something simpler, more practical for riding. She looked up as he approached, and the smile that lit her face made his breath catch. "You came," she said. "Did you think I would not?" "I hoped, but I was not certain." She stood and walked toward him. "Thank you for taking the risk." Samuel dismounted and tied his horse next to hers. "Natalie, we need to talk about this, about what happened at the reception." "I know. That is why I asked you here." She took a deep breath. "Samuel, I have been thinking about nothing but you for the past 5 days. I know it is madness. I know all the reasons it cannot work. But I cannot seem to make myself care about those reasons. Your father will never accept me. My father does not get to choose who I love." The word hung between them, enormous and terrifying and exhilarating. "Love," Samuel said quietly. "Is it too soon to call it that? Perhaps. But I feel something when I am with you, Samuel, something I have never felt before. Every suitable gentleman my father has introduced me to has left me cold, but you, a man I barely know, you make me feel alive." Samuel closed the distance between them. "I feel it too. From the moment I saw you, something changed. But Natalie, I have nothing to give you. I earn $30 a month and sleep in a bunkhouse. You deserve so much more." "I do not want more," she said fiercely. "I want real. I want honest. I want someone who looks at me and sees me, not my father's position or my family's money." "You see me, Samuel." "I see you," he said, and then he was kissing her. The kiss was tentative at first, questioning, but then Natalie leaned into him and it deepened. Samuel wrapped his arms around her, and for a moment the whole world fell away. There was only the two of them, the wind on the hill and the truth of what was happening between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We cannot keep this secret forever," Samuel said. "I know, but can we try, just for a little while? Let me find the right way to tell my father to make him understand." "Natalie, he is never going to understand. Men like your father, they have certain expectations. Then I will defy those expectations." There was steel in her voice now. "I am not some delicate flower that needs to be arranged in a vase, Samuel. I am stronger than my father thinks, strong enough to fight for what I want, for who I want." They spent the next 2 hours talking, learning about each other. Natalie told him about growing up in Boston, about her mother's death when she was 12, about the suffocating pressure to be the perfect daughter. Samuel told her about his own childhood, about losing his parents to fever when he was 14, about learning to survive on his own. "We are both orphans in a way," Natalie said, "both trying to find where we belong." "I think maybe I have found it," Samuel said, looking at her. They arranged to meet again the following week, and then the week after that. Through the hot remainder of that summer and into the golden days of autumn, they stole moments together. Sometimes at the mission ruins, sometimes at a secluded bend in the river, once at a line shack on the far edge of Copper River Ranch. Each meeting deepened what was between them, transforming infatuation into something more substantial. Samuel knew they were taking enormous risks. If Judge Emerson discovered the relationship, the consequences could be severe, but he could not bring himself to stop. Natalie had become essential to him, as necessary as air or water. The ranch hands noticed the change in him. Daniel teased him about being distracted, and Pete gave him worried looks but said nothing. Josiah and Margaret knew something was happening, but they kept their concerns to themselves. It was late October when everything changed. Samuel was in town picking up supplies when he saw Natalie walking with a well-dressed man in his early 30s. The man was talking animatedly, and Natalie was smiling politely, but Samuel could see the tension in her posture. He loaded the supplies into the wagon and was preparing to leave when Natalie appeared beside him. "Samuel, I need to talk to you." "Who was that man?" "Richard Chambers. He is an attorney from Chicago, here to establish a practice. My father invited him to dinner last night." She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then lowered her voice. "My father wants me to encourage his attention." Something cold settled in Samuel's chest. "I see." "No, you do not see." "Samuel, I told my father last night that I am not interested in Mr. Chambers or anyone else he might want to introduce me to. I told him I have feelings for someone else." "You told him about me." "Not specifically, not yet. But he demanded to know who, and I cannot keep lying to him." "Samuel, I think it is time. Time to stop hiding, time to face this directly." "Natalie, you know what will happen." "Yes. There will be anger and threats and probably a great deal of unpleasantness, but I cannot keep living this lie. I love you, Samuel Edwards, and I am tired of pretending I do not." It was the first time either of them had said the words plainly. "I love you too," Samuel said, "but I am terrified of what loving you might cost." Whatever it costs, we will face it together." She reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "Come to the house tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. I will tell my father you are coming, that we need to speak with him." "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything." That night, Samuel lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the next evening. He played out a dozen different scenarios in his mind, none of them ending well. Judge Emerson would refuse to consider the relationship. He would forbid Natalie from seeing Samuel. He might even have Samuel arrested on some trumped-up charge. Men of power had done worse to protect their family's reputation. But Samuel also knew that Natalie was right. They could not continue hiding forever. If what they felt for each other was real, it needed to be brought into the light, whatever the consequences. The next day crawled by. Samuel went through the motions of work, but his mind was elsewhere. Daniel asked him twice if he was feeling well, and Josiah sent him back to the bunkhouse early, telling him to rest. "You are no good to me when you are half present," Josiah said, not unkindly. Samuel washed and changed into his best clothes for the second time that autumn. As he was preparing to ride into town, Pete caught him outside the barn. "You are going to see her," Pete said. It was not a question, going to talk to her father. Pete whistled low. "That is brave or foolish, I have not decided which. Maybe both. If this goes badly, if you need help, you know where to find us." "Right." The offer touched Samuel more than he could express. "Thanks, Pete." The ride into Bismarck felt both too long and too short. As Samuel approached Judge Emerson's house, he saw lamplight glowing in the windows. He tied his horse and stood for a moment, gathering his courage. Then he climbed the steps and knocked. Mrs. Crawford answered, her expression sour. "Mr. Edwards, Miss Natalie said you would be calling. Come in." She led him to Judge Emerson's study, a room lined with law books and dominated by a large desk. Judge Emerson sat behind the desk, and Natalie stood beside the fireplace. She gave Samuel an encouraging look as he entered. Judge Theodore Emerson was a man in his middle 50s, with iron gray hair and the kind of stern features that made him look permanently displeased. He did not stand when Samuel entered, nor did he invite him to sit. "So you are the young man my daughter has been sneaking around with," the judge said without preamble. "Father," Natalie began, but he cut her off. "I was not speaking to you." He turned his attention back to Samuel. "What is your name?" "Samuel Edwards, sir." "And what do you do, Mr. Edwards?" "I am a ranch hand at Copper River Ranch." "A ranch hand." The judge said it the way someone might say criminal or disease. "And you thought it appropriate to pursue my daughter." "I think your daughter is the finest woman I have ever met," Samuel said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "And yes, sir, I love her." "Love?" Judge Emerson leaned back in his chair. "Do you have any idea what love requires, Mr. Edwards? It requires the ability to provide for a family. It requires social standing and stability. It requires more than $30 a month and a bunk in a ranch house." "Father, that is enough," Natalie said, moving to stand beside Samuel. "Samuel is hardworking and honest and decent. That matters more than money or social standing." "Does it?" "Does it really?" The judge stood now, his voice rising. "Natalie, you were educated at the finest schools in Boston. You have been raised for a certain kind of life. Do you truly believe you can be happy living in poverty?" "I do not care about wealth. You do not care because you have never been without it." The judge was shouting now. "You have no idea what it means to scrape and struggle to go without, to see opportunities closed to you because of your station in life. I will not allow you to throw away every advantage you have been given for a romantic fantasy." "It is not a fantasy," Samuel said. "What we feel for each other is real. What you feel is infatuation, nothing more. It will fade, and you will be left with the brutal reality of trying to survive on a ranch hand's wages. He turned back to Natalie. I forbid this relationship. You will not see this man again. You cannot forbid it, Natalie said, and there was a tremor in her voice, but also determination. I am 20 years old, Father. I am not a child. As long as you live under my roof and depend on my support, you will follow my rules. Then perhaps I should not live under your roof. The words fell like a thunderclap. Judge Emerson's face went white, then red. You would not dare. I would, I will. Natalie took Samuel's hand. Father, I love you and I respect you, but I will not let you dictate my heart. If you cannot accept Samuel, then I will leave. You are hysterical. Go to your room and we will discuss this when you have calmed down. I am perfectly calm. And she was. Her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. Father, please, I am asking you to give Samuel a chance. Get to know him. See what I see. What I see is a common laborer trying to rise above his station by seducing a naive girl. That is not fair, Samuel began, but Judge Emerson cut him off. Get out of my house, now, before I have you arrested. On what charge? Samuel asked. I am a territorial judge, boy. I will think of something. Natalie's hand tightened on Samuel's. Samuel, go, please. Let me talk to my father alone. Samuel did not want to leave her, but he also did not want to make things worse. He nodded and turned to go, but at the door he looked back. I love your daughter, sir. That is not going to change, no matter what you say or do. We will see about that, Judge Emerson said coldly. Outside, Samuel stood on the porch, breathing hard. Through the study window he could hear raised voices, though he could not make out the words. He wanted to go back in, to stand beside Natalie, but he knew his presence would only inflame things further. He rode back to the ranch in a fog of anger and fear. The confrontation had gone as badly as he had feared. Judge Emerson would do everything in his power to end the relationship, and he had considerable power to wield. 2 days passed without word from Natalie. Samuel alternated between hope and despair. He threw himself into ranch work, trying to exhaust himself, but nothing helped. He missed Natalie with a physical ache. On the 3rd day, Mrs. Crawford appeared at Copper River Ranch, driving a small buggy. She asked for Samuel, and when he met her in the yard, she handed him a sealed envelope. From Miss Natalie, she said. I should not be doing this, but the girl is determined, and I suppose I admire that, even if I think you are both making a terrible mistake. Thank you, Samuel said. Do not thank me yet. If the judge finds out I delivered this, I will lose my position. She drove off, and Samuel tore open the envelope. The note was longer this time, written in Natalie's careful script. My dearest Samuel, these past 2 days have been a nightmare. My father and I have argued constantly. He is threatening to send me back to Boston, to cut off my allowance, to do whatever it takes to end our relationship. But I am not backing down. I have told him that I am an adult capable of making my own choices, and that I choose you. He does not understand. He thinks I am being foolish and romantic. Perhaps I am, but I would rather be foolish with you than wise with anyone else. I am not allowed to leave the house unsupervised, so we cannot meet at our usual places. But I am working on a plan. Trust me, my love, and do not give up. What we have is worth fighting for. Yours always, N. Samuel read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it in his pocket. She was fighting for them. The least he could do was fight too. Over the next week, Samuel considered his options. He could accept defeat and walk away, but the thought made him feel hollow. He could try to reason with Judge Emerson again, but that seemed pointless. Or he could prove to the judge that he was more than just a ranch hand, that he had ambition and prospects. That last option seemed the most promising, but it required a plan. Samuel went to Josiah Miller and asked for a private conversation. They walked out to the corral, away from the other hands. "You are mixed up with the judge's daughter," Josiah said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir." "And the judge is not happy about it." "No, sir. He wants to end it, but Natalie and we are not willing to give up." Josiah leaned on the fence, watching the horses. "What do you want from me, Sam?" "A chance to prove myself. A chance to be more than just a hand." Samuel took a breath. "You have talked about wanting to expand the ranch, running cattle up in the Yellowstone country. Let me do it. Let me take a crew up there, establish a northern range. I will work harder than anyone, and I will make it succeed." "That is rough country, Sam." "Harder than anything you have done before. I can handle it." Josiah studied him for a long moment. "This is about showing the judge you are not just some drifting cowhand, is not it? You want to prove you can build something." "Yes, sir." "And if I say no, then I will find another way." "But I am asking for a chance." Josiah was quiet for a while, then he nodded. "All right. I have been thinking about the northern range anyway. You can take Daniel and 2 other hands, establish a line camp up near the Yellowstone. But understand, Sam, this is not a favor. If you fail, it costs me money and reputation. You succeed on merit or not at all." "I understand. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Do not thank me yet. And Sam, even if you succeed, it might not be enough for the judge, I know, but I have to try." Samuel spent the next few days preparing for the expedition north. He would be leaving in early November, which meant arriving in the Yellowstone country just as winter was setting in. It would be hard, brutal work, but it was a chance to prove himself. Before he left, he needed to see Natalie to explain what he was doing. He sent a message through Mrs. Crawford asking for a meeting at the mission ruins. He waited there for 2 hours, but Natalie never came. Instead, Mrs. Crawford appeared with another note. "Miss Natalie is essentially a prisoner," the housekeeper said. "The judge watches her constantly. She wanted me to tell you that she is trying to find a way, but it is difficult." The note confirmed what Mrs. Crawford had said and added more. "Samuel, my father is making plans to send me to Chicago to stay with my aunt for the winter. He thinks distance will end what we feel for each other. I am going to refuse, but I am not sure I can stop him. If I am forced to go, I will find a way back to you. Please do not give up on me. I love you." Samuel felt panic rising. If Judge Emerson sent Natalie to Chicago, it could be months before they saw each other again. Months for the judge to work on her, to introduce her to other men, to wear down her resolve. He rode straight to the judge's house and pounded on the door. "Mrs. Crawford answered, her eyes going wide. "Mr. Edwards, you should not be here. I need to see Natalie." "The judge will have you arrested." "Let him. I need to see her." Before Mrs. Crawford could respond, Natalie appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing a simple day dress, and her face was pale but determined. "Samuel," she said, and started down the stairs. "Natalie, stay where you are," came Judge Emerson's voice. He appeared from his study, his face thunderous. "Mr. Edwards, I warned you to stay away." "I am leaving tomorrow for the Yellowstone country," Samuel said, ignoring the judge and speaking directly to Natalie. "Josiah Miller is letting me establish a northern range for the ranch. It is a chance to build something, to prove myself. I will be gone for months, through the winter." "Samuel, that is dangerous," Natalie said, descending the rest of the stairs despite her father's glare. "I have to do this. I have to show that I am more than what your father thinks I am. You do not have to prove anything to me, but I do have to prove it to the world." "Natalie, if you are sent to Chicago, I am not going to Chicago," she said firmly. "I have told my father I will not go, and he cannot force me." "I can and I will," Judge Emerson said. "Young lady, you are testing my patience. Then maybe it is time your patience was tested." Natalie turned to face her father. "Father, I have tried to be respectful. I have tried to make you understand, but you refuse to listen. Samuel is a good man, a decent man, and I love him. If you send me to Chicago, I will only come back. If you forbid me from seeing him, I will find a way. You cannot control this. I am your father, and I am grateful for everything you have done for me, but I am also my own person, and I get to choose my own life. You raised me to be strong and independent. You cannot be surprised when I actually am. Father and daughter stared at each other, and Samuel saw the conflict in Judge Emerson's face. He was a man accustomed to control, to having his word be law, but he was also, beneath the stern exterior, a father who loved his daughter. "Natalie," the judge said, and his voice was softer now, "I only want what is best for you. I know, but what is best for me is not what you think. What is best for me is Samuel." The judge looked at Samuel, really looked at him for the first time, and Samuel met his gaze steadily. "You really believe you can provide for my daughter?" the judge asked. "Not yet, sir, but I am working toward it. The northern range is just the beginning. I am not asking for your blessing today. I am asking for a chance to earn it. And if you fail, then I fail. But I will fail trying, which is better than succeeding at a life I do not want." Judge Emerson was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, and suddenly he looked older, tired. "Go on your expedition, Mr. Edwards. Do what you need to do. Natalie will be here when you return." "I am not sending her to Chicago." "Father," Natalie began, surprise evident in her voice. "I am not giving my blessing," the judge said quickly. "I am simply acknowledging that you are both adults and I cannot lock you in your room forever. But understand this, both of you. If this relationship is to continue, it will have to prove itself over time. I am not handing my daughter over to a man who cannot support her." "That is fair," Samuel said. "Father, thank you," Natalie said, moving to embrace him. The judge returned the embrace stiffly, then gently pushed her away. "Do not make me regret this, either of you." Samuel left the house feeling like he had just survived a battle. It was not victory, not exactly, but it was not defeat either. He had bought time, and time was what he needed. That night, Natalie managed to slip away from the house and meet Samuel at the mission ruins. It was cold, the November wind biting, but neither of them cared. They held each other in the shelter of the old stone walls and talked about the future. "I am scared," Natalie admitted. "Scared of what could happen to you up north. The winter will be harsh. I have survived harsh winters before. But not alone, not in the wilderness. I will not be alone. I will have Daniel and the others, and I will have you here waiting for me. That will be enough to bring me through anything. When will you leave, Dawn? We want to get to the Yellowstone and set up camp before the worst of the winter hits. How long will you be gone? 3 months, maybe 4, until spring." Natalie pressed her face against his chest. "That feels like forever." "I will come back," Samuel promised. "And when I do, I will be something more than a ranch hand. I will be a man building a future I want to share with you." They stayed at the ruins until late, talking and holding each other and stealing kisses in the cold. When Samuel finally rode back to the ranch, his heart was full of determination. He would make this work. He would prove himself worthy of Natalie, not for her father's sake, but for his own. The expedition north left at dawn as planned. Samuel, Daniel, and 2 other hands named Marcus Thornton and James Whitley drove 100 head of cattle and a wagon full of supplies toward the Yellowstone country. The journey took 10 days of hard riding through increasingly wild terrain. The land they reached was beautiful and brutal. Rolling grasslands gave way to pine forests and rocky hills. Game was plentiful, deer and elk and even buffalo, but so were the dangers. They saw signs of wolves and mountain lions, and on the 5th day, they encountered a band of Dakota hunters who watched them pass with unreadable expressions. "Let us hope they are feeling friendly," Daniel muttered. "They are just hunting, same as anyone," Samuel said. "We give them space, they will give us space." The Lakota did not approach, and the expedition continued without incident. They established their camp on a broad meadow near a creek that fed into the Yellowstone River. There was good grazing for the cattle and timber for building. Over the next 2 weeks, the 4 men worked from dawn to dusk, building a line shack, a simple log structure that would provide shelter through the winter. They built a corral for the horses and scouted the surrounding area, learning the land. The work was exhausting, but Samuel drove himself harder than the others, barely stopping to rest. At night, lying in his bedroll, he would think of Natalie and use thoughts of her as fuel for the next day's labor. Winter came early and hard. By mid-November, snow was falling regularly, and the temperature plummeted. The cattle grew shaggy winter coats and clustered together for warmth. The 4 men took turns watching the herd, making sure none wandered off or fell prey to predators. It was brutal work. Samuel learned things about cold he had never imagined. He learned that fingers could go numb inside heavy gloves, that breath froze in beards and mustaches, that stepping outside without proper covering could lead to frostbite in minutes. He learned the constant vigilance required to keep livestock alive through a northern winter, but he also learned that he was capable of more than he had thought. He learned to read the weather, to anticipate storms. He learned to track animals through snow and to find shelter when blizzards struck. He learned leadership, making decisions that kept his men and the herd safe. In December, a blizzard struck that lasted 3 days. The 4 men huddled in the line shack while wind howled outside and snow piled up to the windows. They had brought enough supplies to last the winter, but rationing became necessary. They ate beans and salt pork and hard biscuits, and they told stories to pass the time. "You ever going to tell us about this girl you are trying to impress?" Daniel asked on the second night of the blizzard. Samuel smiled. "Judge Emerson's daughter, her name is Natalie," Marcus whistled. "You are aiming high, Sam, maybe, but she is worth it." "She must be something special to have you out here freezing your tail off," James said. "She is. She is educated and beautiful and smart. But more than that, she is brave. She is standing up to her father, to everyone, because of what we feel for each other." "What does she see in you?" Daniel asked, then quickly added, "No offense, Sam, but you are not exactly a wealthy cattle baron." "I have been wondering that myself," Samuel admitted. "I think maybe she sees potential, or maybe she just sees me, the real me, and that is enough." "Well, I hope it works out," Marcus said. "A woman who will wait for a man through a Dakota winter is a woman worth keeping." As winter deepened, the work became routine but no less demanding. They lost 3 cattle to cold, 2 to wolves. Samuel marked each loss as a failure, something to learn from and prevent next time. He kept a journal, noting what worked and what did not, building knowledge that would make future winters easier. In January, the cold was so intense that the creek froze solid. They had to melt snow for water, a tedious process that consumed time and firewood. Samuel began to worry about their wood supply and organized cutting parties, the men taking turns venturing into the forest to fell trees and drag them back to camp. During one such expedition, Samuel and Daniel encountered the same band of Lakota they had seen on the way north. This time, the natives approached, and Samuel tensed, his hand moving toward the rifle on his saddle. "Easy," Daniel said. "Let us see what they want." The leader of the Lakota group was a man about Samuel's age with a weathered face and intelligent eyes. He spoke in a mixture of Lakota and broken English, supplemented with sign language. What Samuel understood was that the Lakota had been watching them all winter. They were curious about the white men living in what the Lakota considered their hunting grounds. But more than curiosity, they had respect. The Lakota leader indicated that surviving a winter in this country was proof of strength. Samuel tried to communicate that they meant no harm, that they were only looking after cattle for the season. The Lakota leader seemed to understand. He offered Samuel a trade, furs for tobacco. Samuel had tobacco in the supplies, and he made the trade gladly. The furs would provide extra warmth in the line shack. As the Lakota rode away, Daniel let out a breath. That could have gone badly. But it did not, Samuel said. This is their land. Showing respect costs us nothing. February brought a brief thaw followed by more storms. The cattle had lost weight over the winter, but most had survived, and that was all Samuel could ask. He was proud of what he and his crew had accomplished. They had established a foothold in hard country, proved that Copper River Ranch could expand its range. But more than that, Samuel had proved something to himself. He was not just a ranch hand following orders. He was capable of leadership, of building something from nothing. He carried that knowledge like a flame against the cold. In early March, as the worst of the winter began to break, Samuel decided it was time to return to Bismarck. They would leave the line shack stocked and ready for the next crew, but Samuel needed to get back. He needed to see Natalie, to find out if she had waited, if what they had was still alive after months apart. The journey south took a week. The cattle had survived well enough to be driven, and the 4 men were lean and weathered but triumphant. They had done what they set out to do. When they reached Copper River Ranch, Josiah was waiting in the yard. He looked over the cattle with a practiced eye, counting heads and noting their condition. Lost 15 head, Samuel reported. 3 to cold, 2 to wolves, and the rest scattered. We will recover some when we go back in the spring. 85% survival through a Yellowstone winter, Josiah said. Sam, that is better than I dared hope. You did good work. Thank you, sir. I am increasing your wages to $45 a month, effective immediately. And I am making you foreman of the Northern Range. You will have full authority to hire hands and make decisions up there. Samuel felt a surge of pride. It was recognition, proof that he was more than just a laborer. I appreciate that, Mr. Miller. You earned it. Now go clean yourself up. You look like a bear that crawled out of hibernation. And then go see that girl. I imagine she has been waiting long enough. Samuel did not need to be told twice. He washed, shaved away the thick beard he had grown, and put on clean clothes. Then he rode into Bismarck, his heart pounding with anticipation and fear. What if the winter had changed things? What if Natalie's feelings had cooled? What if Judge Emerson had found a way to turn her against him? He went straight to the judge's house and knocked on the door. Mrs. Crawford answered, and her stern face broke into something that might have been a smile. Mr. Edwards, we heard you survived the winter. Is Natalie here? She is. Wait in the parlor. I will fetch her. Samuel paced the parlor, too nervous to sit. He heard footsteps on the stairs, and then Natalie was there, and the sight of her made everything else fall away. She looked different, older somehow. The soft edges of the girl he had met in September had been replaced by something stronger, more defined. But her eyes were the same, and when they landed on him, they filled with such joy that Samuel forgot how to breathe. Samuel, she said, and then she was across the room and in his arms. They held each other for a long moment, not speaking, just existing in the reality of being together again. When they finally pulled back, both had tears in their eyes. I did not know if you would come back, Natalie said. I told myself you would, but winter was so long and I heard stories about how harsh it was in the north. I was so scared. I promised I would come back. I always keep my promises. Tell me everything. What was it like? So Samuel told her. About the blizzards and the cold, about losing cattle and encounters with Lakota hunters, about learning to survive in country that did not forgive mistakes. And Natalie listened with the same intensity she had shown that first night on the terrace, as if every word mattered. "And now," she asked when he finished, "what happens now?" "Now I am foreman of the Northern Range. Josiah is paying me more, and I have authority to hire men and make decisions. It is not much yet, but it is a start. It is proof that I can build something. Samuel, you have never had to prove anything to me. I know, but I had to prove it to myself." He took her hands. "Natalie, I want to marry you. I know we still have obstacles. I know your father still has reservations, but I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They kissed, and it felt like coming home after a long journey. "We should tell my father," Natalie said when they finally broke apart. "He has been better since you left, more accepting of the idea of us. I think he respects what you did, going north like that. Then let us talk to him." Judge Emerson was in his study as usual. When Samuel and Natalie entered together, he looked up from his papers and regarded them with an expression that was hard to read. "Mr. Edwards, I heard you returned." "Yes, sir. I have just come from the ranch. Josiah Miller spoke highly of your work over the winter. He says you established a successful northern range and proved yourself a capable leader." "I tried, sir." The judge set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Natalie tells me you have become quite important to her." "I hope so, sir, because she has become everything to me." "And you wish to marry her?" It was not a question, but Samuel answered anyway. "Yes, sir, I do. I am not a wealthy man, and I may never be, but I can provide for her, and I can promise that I will love her and protect her for the rest of my life." Judge Emerson was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "When I first came to Dakota, I thought I knew what mattered. Social position, education, wealth. I thought those were the measures of a man. But these past months, watching my daughter refuse every suitable match I proposed, watching her stand firm in her choice despite all the pressure I brought to bear, I have learned something. Character matters more than station. Determination matters more than birthright." He stood and came around the desk. "Mr. Edwards, you have proven your character. You took on a dangerous task to prove yourself, and you succeeded. That speaks to the kind of man you are. I am not entirely reconciled to this match. I still believe my daughter deserves every comfort and advantage. But I also believe she deserves to be happy, and for reasons I do not entirely understand, you make her happy." "Father, does this mean?" Natalie began. "It means I am giving my permission. If you truly wish to marry this man, I will not stand in your way." Natalie threw her arms around her father. "Thank you, Father. Thank you." Judge Emerson patted her back awkwardly, then looked at Samuel over her shoulder. "Do not make me regret this, Mr. Edwards. I will spend every day of my life making sure you do not, sir." The wedding was planned for late April, after the last of the winter storms had passed, but before Samuel would need to return north for the summer. It would be a small ceremony, just family and close friends. Natalie did not want a grand society affair. She wanted something simple and real. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind. Natalie worked with Mrs. Crawford to prepare, and Samuel split his time between ranch work and helping to find a home for himself and his bride. Josiah offered them a small house on ranch property, a 2-room cabin that had been used by a previous foreman. It was modest, but it was theirs, and Natalie declared it perfect. "We can make it a home," she said, standing in the empty main room. "We can build a life here." Samuel came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Are you sure about this? About giving up the comforts you are used to?" "I am not giving up anything," she said, turning in his arms. "I am gaining everything that matters. Samuel, I do not need a fine house or expensive things. I need you. That is all I have ever needed." "Status means nothing without your love," Samuel said softly, echoing a thought that had been growing in his mind through the long winter. "All the wealth and position in the world would be meaningless without you. And you understand that, in a way my father never could. That is why I love you." The wedding took place on a clear spring morning in late April 1879. Judge Emerson had arranged for the ceremony to be held in Bismarck's small church, and despite the modest guest list, the pews were filled. Word had spread about the judge's daughter marrying a cowboy, and people were curious. Samuel stood at the altar in a new suit, the finest he had ever owned, and waited for his bride. Daniel stood beside him as his best man, and Pete and the other ranch hands filled the front pew, all scrubbed clean and uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes. Then the doors opened, and Natalie entered on her father's arm. She wore a simple white dress, nothing elaborate, but to Samuel she looked more beautiful than any queen in any palace. Her dark hair was adorned with spring wildflowers, and her green eyes were fixed on him with such love that he felt his chest tighten. Judge Emerson led his daughter down the aisle and stopped before Samuel. He placed Natalie's hand in Samuel's, and his voice was gruff when he spoke. "Take care of her." "I will, sir. I promise." The ceremony was traditional and brief. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Samuel kissed his bride, there was applause from the assembled guests. Josiah was grinning, Margaret was crying happy tears, and even Judge Emerson looked pleased, though he tried to hide it. The reception was held at the judge's house, and for a few hours, the social divisions that had seemed so insurmountable were forgotten. Ranch hands mingled with town merchants, and everyone celebrated the union of two people who had fought hard for their happiness. As the sun began to set, Samuel and Natalie slipped away from the party. They rode together to the cabin that would be their home, both still wearing their wedding clothes, both giddy with joy and relief. Inside the cabin, Samuel lit the lamps and started a fire in the stove. Natalie looked around at the simple furnishings they had assembled, the bed, the table, the chairs, the few decorations she had added to make it feel like home. "Are you happy?" Samuel asked. "Happier than I have ever been," she said. "This is everything I wanted, Samuel." "You are everything I wanted." They made love that night with a tenderness and passion that felt like the culmination of everything they had been through, and afterward, lying in each other's arms, they talked about the future. "I will need to go north again in a few weeks," Samuel said. "I am sorry. I wish we could have more time. I understand. The ranch is important and I would never ask you to give up your work." "Come with me," Samuel said suddenly. Natalie propped herself up on one elbow. "What? Come north with me this summer?" "I know it will be hard, that it will not be comfortable, but I do not want to be apart from you. Not now, not when we are just beginning our life together." "Samuel, are you serious?" "Completely. We can make the line shack work for two. It will be an adventure." Natalie laughed, a sound of pure delight. "Then yes. Yes, I will come with you. I want to see this wild country that you love. I want to be part of your life, all of it. Your father is going to object. Let him. I am your wife now. Where you go, I go." Judge Emerson did object, loudly and at length when they told him of their plans. But Natalie stood firm, and eventually the judge relented. He made Samuel promise to keep her safe, and Samuel gave his word. In May of 1879, Samuel and Natalie Edwards, along with Daniel and a new hire named Robert Gaines, drove a fresh herd of cattle north to the Yellowstone country. This time, the journey was different. Natalie rode beside Samuel, and though she was not accustomed to long days in the saddle, she never complained. She learned to handle a horse with confidence, to cook over a campfire, to find joy in the vast open spaces. The line shack was still standing when they arrived, weathered but intact. They cleaned it out and made improvements. Samuel added a second room, giving them more space and privacy. Natalie hung curtains she had made and arranged their few possessions to create a sense of home. That summer was one of the happiest times of Samuel's life. The work was still hard, but sharing it with Natalie made everything better. She learned to help with the cattle, to recognize the signs of sickness or injury. She kept the camp organized and the meals regular. And at night, they would sit outside the shack and watch the stars, talking about their dreams. "I want to own our own ranch someday," Samuel told her one night. "Not just manage someone else's cattle, but build something that is ours." "Then we will," Natalie said. "We will save money and work hard, and eventually we will have our own place. It could take years. I am not going anywhere." In August, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Samuel with joy and terror in equal measure. They were going to be parents. He was going to be a father. The responsibility felt enormous. "We should go back to Bismarck," Samuel said. "You should have a doctor nearby." "Not yet," Natalie said. "I am healthy and strong. We can stay through September and then we will go back." They returned to Bismarck in late September, and Natalie moved back into her father's house for the duration of her pregnancy. Judge Emerson insisted, and for once, Samuel did not argue. The judge could provide comforts and medical care that Samuel could not yet. Samuel continued working at Copper River Ranch, saving every penny he could. Josiah had increased his wages again and had begun talking about the possibility of Samuel becoming a partner in the ranch someday. It was more than Samuel had dared hope for. In March of 1880, Natalie gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Edwards, after Samuel's father. Judge Emerson held his grandson with an expression of wonder, and Samuel saw the hard edges of the judge soften in that moment. "He has your eyes, Natalie," the judge said quietly. "And his father's stubborn chin." "He is perfect," Natalie said, exhausted but glowing with happiness. Samuel held his son for the first time and felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This tiny life depended on him, trusted him to provide and protect. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. As Thomas grew, Natalie proved to be an exceptional mother. She was patient and loving, but also practical and strong. She had adapted to frontier life with remarkable ease, and Samuel fell more in love with her every day. Judge Emerson became a devoted grandfather. He visited the cabin regularly, bringing gifts for Thomas and grudging respect for Samuel. The divide between them never entirely disappeared, but it narrowed significantly. "You have proven me wrong, Mr. Edwards," the judge said one afternoon, watching Thomas toddle around the cabin. "Or perhaps you have proven that I was measuring with the wrong metrics all along. You are providing for my daughter, not with wealth, but with love and dedication. That is worth more than I gave it credit for. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. Natalie is happy. That is what matters to an old man. The years that followed were good ones." Samuel continued to build his reputation and his savings. The northern range prospered, and Josiah made good on his promise to make Samuel a partner in Copper River Ranch. It was a small share at first, just 10%, but it was ownership. It was a stake in something permanent. In 1882, Natalie gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Emma. She had her mother's dark hair and green eyes, and she wrapped both Samuel and Judge Emerson around her tiny finger. By 1885, Samuel and Natalie had saved enough to make a down payment on their own land. It was 500 acres bordering Copper River Ranch, with good grazing and a reliable water source. They built a house, not large but solid and comfortable. It had real glass windows and a stone fireplace and enough room for their growing family. Thomas was now 5, and Emma was 3. Natalie was pregnant again, and they were both hoping for another healthy child. Life was far from easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle lost to disease and injury, financial setbacks and worries. But there was also joy and love, and the satisfaction of building something together. Judge Emerson visited the new ranch regularly. He had retired from the bench the previous year, and grandfatherhood had become his primary occupation. He would sit on the porch with Thomas on his knee, telling stories about Boston and the East, and Natalie would watch with a smile. "I never thought I would see my father so content," she told Samuel one evening. "He was always so driven, so focused on his work, but now, with the children, he has found something more meaningful." "People change," Samuel said. "I know I have. I am not the same ranch hand who helped a frightened woman outside the general store 7 years ago. No, you are so much more. You are a husband, a father, a landowner, a partner. But Samuel, the core of who you are, that has never changed. You are still the honest, decent man who saw me as a person, not just as the judge's daughter. That is who I fell in love with, and that is who I love still." "Status means nothing without your love," Samuel said, pulling her close. "I learned that from a very wise woman. And I learned that love means everything from a very wise man," Natalie replied. In October of 1885, Natalie gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named James. The delivery was harder than the previous 2, and for a few frightening hours, Samuel feared he might lose her. But Natalie was strong, and she pulled through. When he held James for the first time, with Natalie sleeping peacefully beside them, Samuel felt gratitude so intense it was almost painful. He had a wife he loved beyond measure, 3 healthy children, a ranch that was growing, and a future full of promise. 7 years ago, he had been a ranch hand with nothing but the clothes on his back and a decent work ethic. Now he was a man of property, a husband, a father, and a friend to people who respected him. And it had all started with a spooked horse and a woman in a blue dress. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. Seasons turned, cattle were born and raised and sold, crops were planted and harvested. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Emma was wild and fearless, always climbing trees or racing across the fields. James was too young yet to show his personality, but Samuel suspected he would be a handful. Natalie thrived in her role as ranch wife and mother. She had found her place in this wild country, and she wore it with confidence. She kept the books for the ranch, managed the household, taught the children their letters and numbers, and still found time to ride out with Samuel to check on the cattle. Sometimes, when they were alone, she would tell him stories about her life in Boston, about the society parties and fancy balls, about the life she could have had if she had made different choices. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked once. "Giving up all that for this?" "Not for one single moment," Natalie said firmly. "Samuel, that life was suffocating. It was all appearances and expectations, no substance. This life, our life, it is real. It is messy and hard and sometimes scary, but it is ours. We built it together. How could I ever regret that?" In the summer of 1888, Judge Theodore Emerson passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 68 years old and had lived to see his grandchildren grow. The funeral was well attended, and many spoke of the judge's fairness and his contribution to bringing law and order to the territory. But Samuel would always remember him as the stern man who had eventually learned to accept and even respect a ranch hand who loved his daughter. At the burial, with Natalie beside him and his children gathered close, Samuel said a silent thank you to the judge for raising such a remarkable woman. Natalie inherited her father's house in Bismarck, and after much discussion, they decided to sell it. The money went toward expanding their ranch, purchasing more land and cattle. The Edwards Ranch, as it was now called, grew to encompass over 2,000 acres. Samuel hired more hands as the ranch expanded, and he treated them the way Josiah Miller had treated him, with fairness and respect. Several of the men he hired were young and poor, just as he had been, and he made sure they had opportunities to prove themselves and advance. Daniel Fletcher, who had been Samuel's friend since the beginning, became foreman. Pete Morrison retired but stayed on the ranch in a small cabin, helping where he could and entertaining the children with stories. By 1890, the Edwards Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the territory. Samuel was respected throughout the region as a fair dealer and a man of his word. Natalie was known for her kindness and intelligence, and their children were growing up healthy and happy. One evening in late autumn, Samuel and Natalie sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The children were inside, Thomas helping Emma with her homework while James played with carved wooden animals Samuel had made. "We have come a long way," Samuel said, taking Natalie's hand. "We have," she agreed. "Do you remember that day outside the general store, when the horse spooked and you came running? I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I remember thinking you had kind eyes and strong hands." She laughed. "I also remember Mrs. Crawford telling me later that I should stay away from rough cowboys, that they were nothing but trouble. She was right about the trouble part, the best kind of trouble." Natalie leaned her head on his shoulder. "Samuel, I want you to know something. Every choice I made, every time I stood up to my father or defied convention or chose the hard path, it was worth it. You were worth it. This life we have built is worth everything. You are my world, Natalie, you and the children. Everything I have done, everything I have built, it has all been for you. Status means nothing without your love," Natalie whispered, repeating the words that had become their private truth. "My father eventually understood that. It took him years, but he finally saw that wealth and position are empty without real connection, without love. And I learned that love is worth fighting for," Samuel said, "worth risking everything for." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and the stars emerged. Inside, they could hear the children laughing, a sound that never failed to fill Samuel with contentment. The next morning, Samuel woke early as always. He dressed quietly, not wanting to wake Natalie, and went outside to start the day's work. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, and his breath misted in the cold. He walked to the barn to check on the horses and found Thomas already there, mucking out stalls. "You are up early," Samuel said. "Wanted to help," Thomas said. He was 10 now, tall for his age and serious-minded. "Papa, Daniel says we are going to drive cattle to market next week. Can I come? You have school." "I can miss a few days. Mama can teach me when I get back." Samuel considered. The drive to market was several days' journey and it would be hard work. But Thomas was growing up and it was time he learned more about the ranch that would someday be his. "All right," Samuel said, "but you follow orders and work hard, no complaining." Thomas's face lit up. "I promise. Thank you, Papa." As they worked together in the barn, Samuel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He was passing on something valuable to his son, not just a ranch but a way of life, a set of values. Hard work, honesty, respect for the land and the animals. These were the things that mattered. The cattle drive was successful. Thomas worked hard and did not complain, even when the weather turned cold and they spent a night huddled around a campfire with rain pouring down. Samuel was proud of his son's determination. When they returned home, Natalie had news. She was pregnant again. The announcement brought mixed feelings. They already had 3 children, and another would strain their resources. But children were a blessing, and both Samuel and Natalie believed in embracing what life brought. In the spring of 1891, Natalie gave birth to their 4th child, another daughter they named Catherine. She was small but healthy, with blonde hair that surprised everyone. Samuel's mother had been blonde, and he liked to think Catherine resembled her grandmother she would never meet. As the 1890s progressed, life continued its steady rhythm. There were good years and bad years, seasons of plenty and seasons of struggle. The ranch survived droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and cattle diseases. Through it all, Samuel and Natalie faced challenges together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. The children grew. Thomas became a skilled horseman and a capable rancher. Emma shocked everyone by declaring her intention to become a teacher and insisting on attending normal school in Bismarck. James showed a talent for mechanics and was fascinated by the new machinery beginning to appear on ranches. Catherine was still young, but she had inherited her mother's sharp mind and her father's stubbornness. In 1896, North Dakota achieved statehood, an event Judge Emerson had worked toward but never lived to see. Samuel and Natalie traveled to Bismarck for the celebration, and as they watched the flag being raised, Natalie squeezed his hand. "My father would have loved this," she said. "He would have," Samuel agreed. "And he would have been proud of you, of everything you have become." "I hope so." I think, at the end, he understood what really mattered. That summer, Thomas turned 16 and announced that he wanted to establish a northern range, just as his father had done years before. Samuel recognized the need to prove himself in his son's eyes and gave his blessing. Thomas spent that summer in the wild country near the Yellowstone, and when he returned in the fall, he was leaner and more confident. He had passed his own test. Emma left for normal school the following year. It was hard for Natalie to see her daughter go, but she was proud of Emma's determination to forge her own path. James, at 13, was already talking about starting a business repairing farm equipment, seeing opportunities in the modernization of agriculture. As the new century approached, Samuel took stock of his life. He was 43 years old, and the years of hard work had left their mark. His hands were scarred and calloused, his face weathered by sun and wind. But he was healthy and strong, and when he looked in the mirror, he saw a man content with the choices he had made. The ranch was prosperous. They employed 15 hands now, and the herd had grown to over 1,000 head. The house had been expanded twice to accommodate the growing family. They had weathered financial panics and personal losses, and through it all, the foundation of their marriage had held firm. One night in December of 1899, with a new century looming, Samuel and Natalie hosted a gathering at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate. Daniel and his wife were there, Pete Morrison still alive at 68 and full of stories, Josiah and Margaret Miller, now quite elderly but still sharp. The house was full of laughter and music, children running underfoot and adults swapping tales. As midnight approached, Samuel found Natalie on the porch, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "Needed some air?" he asked, joining her. "Needed a moment to take it all in," she said. "A new century is beginning, Samuel. Can you believe it?" "Barely. Feels like just yesterday I was a ranch hand with nothing to my name. And now look at what you have built, what we have built." Samuel wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "When I met you 21 years ago, I never imagined this, any of this. The ranch, the children, the life we have created. You have given me more than I ever dreamed possible." "We gave it to each other," Natalie said. "That day you helped me outside the general store, you saw me. Not the judge's daughter, not a social trophy, but me. That was the beginning of everything. Status means nothing without your love, Samuel said softly. That has been the truth of our life together. All the success, all the things we have accumulated, none of it would matter without you. And I learned that love is not found in ballrooms or fancy parties, Natalie replied. It is found in shared work and shared struggles, in building something together from nothing. You taught me what real love looks like, Samuel Edwards. They stood together in the cold, watching their breath mist in the air. Inside, the sound of celebration continued. Their children were there, healthy and strong, beginning to forge their own paths. Their friends surrounded them, people who had become family over the years. "What do you think the new century will bring?" Natalie asked. "Change, certainly. The world is moving faster now. But whatever comes, we will face it together, just as we always have." "Together," Natalie agreed. "Always together." The clock struck midnight and cheers erupted from inside the house. A new century had begun. Samuel kissed his wife, tasting the salt of her tears, his own eyes damp with emotion. They had started with nothing but love and determination. They had faced opposition from society, from Natalie's father, from a harsh and unforgiving landscape. But they had persevered, building a life and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As they went back inside to join the celebration, Samuel reflected on the journey. From ranch hand to ranch owner, from solitary cowboy to husband and father, he had traveled far. But the most important journey had been the one he had taken with Natalie. From that moment outside the general store to this night at the turn of the century, love had been their compass and their strength. It had sustained them through poverty and plenty, through loss and joy, through all the turns of their shared life. And it would continue to sustain them for whatever years remained. Inside, Thomas was dancing with a young woman from a neighboring ranch, and Samuel suspected another wedding would be in their future before long. Emma was home from school for the holidays, regaling a group of younger children with stories about life in Bismarck. James was showing off a new wrench design to anyone who would listen. Catherine, at 9 years old, was determined to stay awake until dawn to prove she was grown up. Natalie moved through the crowd, greeting guests and ensuring everyone had food and drink. She had become the heart of the community, respected and loved by everyone who knew her. The Eastern Society girl had transformed into a frontier woman, strong and capable and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fine dresses or perfect manners. As the night wore on and guests began to depart, Samuel helped people to their wagons and horses, exchanging handshakes and good wishes for the new century. When the last guest had gone and the children had finally been convinced to go to bed, Samuel and Natalie cleaned up together, moving in the comfortable synchronization of two people who had worked side by side for decades. "I am exhausted," Natalie said, sinking into a chair by the fireplace. Samuel sat beside her and she leaned against him. It was a good party. It was a good way to end one century and begin another. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Samuel, do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different? If that horse had not spooked, if we had never met?" "I try not to," Samuel admitted. "The thought of a life without you is unbearable. I feel the same, but sometimes I think about the woman I was before I met you. So concerned with propriety and expectations, so afraid to step outside the lines society had drawn. You freed me from that, Samuel. You showed me that there was another way to live. You freed yourself, Natalie. I just gave you a reason to take the leap. We freed each other then. You gave me courage and I gave you ambition. Together we became more than we could have been apart." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Samuel felt the weight of contentment settle over him. This was enough. This moment, this woman, this life they had built. It was everything. In the years that followed, the Edwards Ranch continued to thrive. Thomas married in 1902, bringing a daughter-in-law named Sarah into the family. Emma became a teacher in Bismarck and married a fellow educator. James started his machinery business and proved to be a savvy entrepreneur. Catherine, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a passion for cattle breeding and becoming her father's most skilled assistant in managing the herd. Samuel and Natalie became grandparents multiple times over, and they embraced the role with joy. Their house was often filled with grandchildren, and Samuel discovered that grandfather was his favorite role of all. He was more patient now than he had been as a young father, more willing to stop work and play with the little ones. In 1910, Samuel turned 53, and Natalie organized a surprise party at the ranch. Friends came from across the state, and Samuel was overwhelmed by the turnout. Person after person stood to speak about his integrity, his generosity, his contribution to the community. It was humbling and deeply moving. When it was Natalie's turn to speak, she stood beside Samuel and took his hand. "My husband is not a man of grand gestures or flowery speeches," she said. "He is a man of quiet strength and steady devotion. 31 years ago, when I was a frightened young woman far from home, he showed me kindness. That kindness grew into friendship, and that friendship grew into love, and that love has sustained me through every day since. Samuel Edwards, you are the finest man I have ever known, and I am honored to share my life with you." The applause was thunderous, and Samuel had to blink back tears. He had never been comfortable being the center of attention, but in that moment, surrounded by family and friends, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of accomplishment. As the years passed, Samuel began to step back from the day-to-day management of the ranch. Thomas was ready to take over, and Samuel trusted his son completely. He still rode out to check on the cattle, still helped with roundups and branding, but more and more, he was content to let the younger generation lead. He and Natalie spent more time together, taking rides across the land they had worked so hard to acquire, sitting on the porch in the evenings, traveling occasionally to visit their far-flung children. They had earned their ease and they embraced it. In the spring of 1915, on a warm May afternoon, Samuel and Natalie rode out to the spot where the original line shack had stood. The structure was long gone, reclaimed by nature, but the location still held meaning for them. It was where they had spent their first summer as husband and wife, where they had begun to build their life together. They dismounted and walked hand in hand through the tall grass. Natalie was 55 now, her dark hair threaded with silver, but to Samuel she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her. The years had been kind to her, and she carried her age with grace. "Remember how cold it got that first winter," Samuel said. "I was so scared you would regret coming with me." "I never regretted it, not for a moment," Natalie smiled. "Though I admit there were times I missed hot baths and soft beds. We have those now. We do. But Samuel, I would trade it all to go back to that tiny shack and those early days, when it was just the two of us against the world." "I would not," Samuel said, "because those early days led to everything we have now. The children, the grandchildren, the ranch, the life we have built. I would not trade any of it. You are right, of course. The journey was the point, not just the destination." They stood in the grass, holding each other as they had so many times before. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and the distant sound of cattle lowing. It was a perfect moment, crystalline in its simplicity. "I love you, Natalie Edwards," Samuel said. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Samuel Edwards. You were my salvation and my great adventure. Choosing you was the best decision I ever made." They rode back to the ranch as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grassland. The house came into view, smoke rising from the chimney, lights glowing in the windows. It represented everything they had worked for, everything they had achieved together. That evening, surrounded by family, Samuel looked around the dinner table and felt profound gratitude. His children were successful and happy, his grandchildren were healthy and full of promise, and the woman he loved sat beside him, her hand in his. Status had meant nothing in the end. Wealth and position had faded to insignificance. What had mattered, what had always mattered, was love. The love between a ranch hand and a judge's daughter, two people who should never have crossed paths but who had found each other anyway. They had built an empire not of money or land, though they had those things, but of family and devotion. And that empire would endure long after they were gone, passed down through generations, a legacy of love and determination. As the years continued to pass, Samuel and Natalie aged together, their love deepening with each season. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1929, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The celebration was grand, but the most meaningful moment came at the end of the night when Samuel and Natalie were alone. 50 years, Natalie said wonderingly. More than half a century together. Best years of my life, Samuel said. Every single one of them, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. Those were the times that proved what we had was real. Natalie leaned into him, and they sat in comfortable silence, two old souls who had journeyed through life together and arrived at contentment. Samuel Edwards passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1932 at the age of 75. He died in the bed he had shared with Natalie for over 50 years, in the house they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created. Natalie lived another 8 years, passing away in the spring of 1940 at the age of 80. Her last words were reported by Catherine, who was with her at the end. She had smiled and whispered, "Tell Samuel I am coming. Tell him to wait for me." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, two simple headstones marking the resting place of two extraordinary people. The epitaph on their shared monument read, "Samuel and Natalie Edwards, together in life, together in eternity. Status meant nothing without their love." The ranch they had built continued to thrive under the stewardship of their descendants. The Edwards name became synonymous with integrity and hard work throughout North Dakota. And whenever family gathered, stories were told about the ranch hand and the judge's daughter who had defied convention to build a life of meaning and purpose. Their love story became legend, passed down through generations as proof that real love could overcome any obstacle, could bridge any divide. It was a story of courage and determination, of two people who had looked at the world's expectations and decided their love mattered more. And in the end, that was their true legacy. Not the land or the cattle or the wealth they had accumulated, but the proof that love, real and honest and true, was worth fighting for. That status and position meant nothing compared to the connection between two souls who recognized each other. Samuel and Natalie Edwards had lived and loved and built something beautiful together. And their story would endure as long as there were people who believed in the power of love to transform lives, to bridge divides, to create meaning in a sometimes harsh and unforgiving world. They had started with nothing but love and a willingness to fight for each other, and in the end, that had been enough, more than enough. It had been everything.